In February 2007, the Whitford family left their home in Wasilla, Alaska, for a weekend trip to visit relatives. They never arrived. The road conditions were icy but clear, their SUV in perfect condition, and the Weather Service reported no major storms in the area. Search teams combed every mile between Wasilla and their destination. No tire tracks, no wreckage, no sign of the family. For 10 years, their disappearance was a cold case, the kind people whispered about at local diners and around wood stoves, each telling ending in the same shrug. They probably slid off somewhere we'll never find. Then, in January 2017, a hunter crossing the frozen edge of Copperhead Lake spotted something under the ice. At first, he thought it was a log. Then the morning light shifted, revealing a roofline, glass, and the unmistakable green of a license plate. By the end of the day, divers confirmed it. The Whitford family's SUV, perfectly preserved under more than a foot of ice. But what investigators found inside didn't match any theory they'd been told for the last decade. Jake Whitford was splitting firewood behind his cabin when the news broke on his kitchen radio. He'd been living the same routine for 10 years. Split wood until his shoulders burned, stack it until his back screamed, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from wandering to February roads and the phone call that changed everything. The broadcaster's voice drifted through his open kitchen window. Breaking news from Copperhead Lake. A hunter has discovered what appears to be a vehicle beneath the ice, believed to be connected to the 2007 disappearance of the Whitford family. The splitting maul slipped from Jake's hands, hit the frozen ground with a dull thud that seemed to echo in his chest. Whitford, his family name, his brother's name, David, Sarah, Katie, Tommy. 10 years of avoiding their names. 10 years of changing the radio station when missing persons stories came on. 10 years of telling himself they'd probably driven off somewhere warm, started over, forgotten the brother who'd sent them down the wrong road. License plate matches the family's missing SUV. Jake's legs went weak. He grabbed the chopping block, bark scraping his palm raw, splinters digging into his skin. The memory hit him like a physical blow. David's voice on the phone that February morning, tired and stressed about the drive to Anchorage. Road conditions look okay for the trip. You still think that lake route's faster? And Jake, half asleep, hungover from another night of drinking away his loneliness, had mumbled something about the Copperhead Lake Road being prettier, faster. Cut 20 minutes off the drive. He'd never actually driven it himself. Vehicle appears to be intact under more than a foot of ice? Intact. Jake stumbled toward the house, boots crunching through snow that felt too much like that February morning when the search teams had given up hope. The radio sat on his kitchen windowsill, small and black, delivering news that felt like a fist through his ribs. Dennis O'Malley, a local hunter, spotted what he initially thought was debris under the ice while checking his trap lines. Jake turned up the volume until the speaker crackled. His hands were shaking. State Police Detective Sarah Jensen confirms the vehicle's registration matches the 2007 missing persons case. Detective Jensen. Jake remembered her from back then, young, determined, the only cop who'd seemed to actually listen when he'd told her about David's planned route. She'd asked him twice about the lake road, about why David would have taken such an indirect path to Anchorage. Jake had lied, told her David liked scenic drives, that the family probably wanted to see the winter landscape. He'd never told her the truth, that he'd recommended a route he'd never driven, based on advice he couldn't even remember getting. The kitchen felt too small suddenly. Jake grabbed his coat, walked outside into the February cold. His breath steamed in the air as he stared across the valley toward the distant mountains. Somewhere out there, past the tree line, was Copperhead Lake. Somewhere under the ice was his brother's family, preserved, waiting. Jake pulled out his phone with numb fingers. Found Detective Jensen's number in his contacts. He'd never deleted it. Couldn't bring himself to erase that last connection to the investigation. She answered on the second ring. Jensen. "It's Jake Whitford." His voice cracked on his own name, a pause, then her voice gentler. "Jake, I figured you'd call. Is it really them?" "We won't know for certain until we bring the vehicle up, but the plates match, the location." She hesitated. "Jake, the car's right where you said David was planning to drive." The words hit him like a physical blow, right where he'd told them to go. "I need to see it," Jake said. "Jake, I don't think—" "I need to see what I did to them." Another pause. Longer this time. "The recovery operation starts tomorrow morning. I can't let you interfere with the investigation, but you can observe from a distance if you think you can handle it." Jake closed his eyes. 10 years of guilt, of wondering, of waking up every morning with the weight of their deaths on his shoulders. "I can handle it." After he hung up, Jake walked back to the woodpile, stared at the scattered logs, the splitting maul lying in the snow where he'd dropped it. For 10 years he'd been splitting wood like he could split apart his memories. Stack them neat and clean, burn them down to ash and heat. But memories didn't burn that easy. He remembered David's excitement about the trip, first vacation in 2 years, chance to see Sarah's sister and her new baby. Katie was 17 then, complaining about missing a school dance. Tommy was 8, asking 1,000 questions about whether they'd see moose or bears on the drive. A normal family doing normal things. Planning a weekend trip to visit relatives, until their uncle gave them directions that led to a frozen grave. Jake picked up the splitting maul. His hands were steady now, purpose replacing panic. Tomorrow he would drive to Copperhead Lake. Tomorrow he would watch them bring his brother's family back from the ice. Tomorrow he would finally know what his careless advice had cost them. The radio was still playing in the kitchen, cycling through weather reports and traffic updates. Normal news for normal people who hadn't spent a decade carrying 4 ghosts. Jake split wood until dark, each strike of the maul driving down through frozen timber like a prayer for forgiveness he'd never receive. Above him, the first stars appeared in the clear February sky. The same stars that had been shining 10 years ago when David's family disappeared into the wilderness Jake had sent them toward. The same stars that had watched them die. Jake didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table until dawn, staring at the family photo he kept in his wallet. David, Sarah, Katie, and Tommy at last summer's 4th of July barbecue. David's arm around Sarah, both kids making faces at the camera, everyone laughing at something Jake had said. He'd taken the picture, had been standing right there, part of the family circle, when everything was still normal. Before Christmas, before the fight, before the phone call that sent them under the ice. Jake traced Tommy's face with his thumb, 8 years old, gap-toothed grin, holding a sparkler that caught the camera flash like a tiny star. By 6 a.m., he was driving toward Copperhead Lake. The roads were clear, morning light turning the snow-covered landscape into something that might have been beautiful if Jake's stomach wasn't twisted into knots. He passed the turnoff where David should have stayed on the main highway, where a different choice would have saved 4 lives. Instead, David had followed his younger brother's advice, taken the scenic route. The lake sat in a valley between low hills, surrounded by spruce trees that looked black against the gray sky. Jake could see the recovery operation from a quarter-mile away. Trucks, trailers, men in bright orange suits moving around on the ice like ants on a dinner plate. He parked behind a state police cruiser and walked toward the tree line. The cold bit through his jacket, but he barely felt it. His whole body was numb, disconnected, like he was watching someone else walk toward the place where his family had died. Detective Jensen met him at the edge of the clearing. She looked older. 10 years had put lines around her eyes and gray in her dark hair. But she still had the same direct gaze that had made Jake uncomfortable back in 2007. "Jake." She didn't offer her hand, just studied his face with cop eyes that missed nothing. "You sure you want to be here?" "I've been here every day for 10 years, Jake said. Just never seen it." Jensen nodded toward the lake. "We started setting up equipment at dawn. Dive teams from Fairbanks. They specialize in cold water recovery. Jake could see them now, men in thick wetsuits working around a hole cut in the ice. Support crew standing by with ropes and monitoring equipment. How deep? About 12 feet, vehicles sitting right at the edge of the drop-off where the lake gets deep. Jensen handed him a pair of binoculars. Take a look. Jake focused the lenses on the dive site. Through the crystal-clear ice he could see it, the teal roof of David's SUV, exactly where Dennis O'Malley had spotted it. The sight hit him like a punch to the chest. Real, undeniable, his brother's car sitting on the lake bottom like it had been parked there. Jesus, he whispered. Ice preserved everything, Jensen said quietly. It's like they just went in yesterday. Jake lowered the binoculars. His hands were shaking. Detective, I need to tell you something about why they were on this road. Jensen turned to look at him. I'm listening. David called me that morning, asked about route conditions. I told him to take the lake road. You told me that 10 years ago, but I never told you why I recommended it. Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. I'd never driven this route, never been to this lake. I said it because someone had mentioned it once. I can't even remember who. Jensen frowned. Someone mentioned the lake road to you? At work, maybe? Or a bar? I honestly don't know. I was drinking a lot back then, after Dad died. David called early. I was hungover, and I just repeated something I'd heard. Jake felt the words tumbling out. 10 years of guilt, finally spoken aloud. I sent them here based on nothing, just some random conversation I can't even remember. Jensen was quiet for a moment, watching the dive team work. Jake, why didn't you tell me this in 2007? Because I was ashamed. Because I thought if you knew how careless I'd been, you'd blame me, like I blame myself. Do you still blame yourself? Jake looked out at the lake, at the hole in the ice where his brother's family waited. Every day. A shout from the dive team interrupted them. One of the divers had surfaced, was waving toward shore. Jensen pulled out a radio. What's the status? We've got a visual on the vehicle interior, came the crackling response. All 4 occupants appear to be present. Jake's legs almost gave out. He'd known intellectually that they were down there, but hearing it confirmed. Any sign of trauma? Jensen asked. Hard to tell from this angle. We need to bring the vehicle up for a proper examination. Jensen looked at Jake. You don't have to watch this part. Yes, I do. The recovery took 3 hours. Jake stood at the tree line, binoculars in his hands, watching as divers attached cables to the SUV's frame. The portable crane groaned to life, cable disappearing into the machinery. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the water in the dive hole began to churn. Jake held his breath. The roof of the SUV broke the surface first. Teal metal, streaming water, the ski rack still attached exactly as David had loaded it that February morning. As the car rose higher, Jake could see through the windows. 4 shapes, still in their seats, perfectly preserved by the cold water. Oh, God, Jake whispered. The car swung gently as the crane lifted it completely clear of the water. Ice fell from the undercarriage, shattering on the lake surface below. In the afternoon light, Jake could see everything through the binoculars. David in the driver's seat, head tilted forward like he was sleeping. Sarah in the passenger seat, her winter coat still zipped up tight. And in the back seats, Katie and Tommy, side by side, looking smaller than Jake remembered. They're all here, he said, voice breaking. They're all here. Jensen's hand touched his shoulder. Jake, there's something else. She led him closer to the recovery site. Up close, the preservation was remarkable. The cold water had stopped time exactly as it had been 10 years ago. But something was wrong. Look at the windows, Jensen said. Jake looked. The driver's side window was cracked down about 3 inches, the passenger window too. They tried to get out, Jensen said quietly, after the car went in the water. Jake felt sick. They were alive? For a few minutes, maybe. Long enough to realize what was happening. Jensen pointed to something else. Scratches on the inside of the driver's door. Fingernail marks in the fabric. Your brother fought to get out, but the water pressure, the cold shock, the panic. She shook her head. In water this cold, they probably had 2, maybe 3 minutes before hypothermia set in. Jake stared at the scratches, at the evidence of his brother's final moments. David, desperately trying to save his family, trying to undo the mistake of following his brother's advice. There's something else, Jensen said. She walked around to the back of the vehicle. Look at this. The rear window had a spiderweb crack pattern, but it wasn't from impact damage. That's from the inside, Jensen said. Someone hit it with something heavy, trying to break through. Jake could picture it. David or Sarah, maybe both of them, frantically trying to smash their way out of the sinking car while their children watched in terror. Detective, Jake said, his voice raw, how does a car end up in the middle of a lake? There's no road leading here, no boat ramp. Jensen had been wondering the same thing. The ice, they must have been driving on the frozen surface. In February? Was the ice thick enough? That's what we need to find out. Jensen led Jake to a weather station laptop one of the technicians had set up. Historical data for February 2007. Look at this, she said, pointing to temperature readings. February 8th was unusually warm, daytime high of 38 degrees. Above freezing? Right, and there had been a warm spell the week before. The ice was probably compromised. Jake studied the data. So they drove onto the lake thinking it was safe, and the ice gave way. That's the theory. But Jensen scrolled to another screen. Look at this wind data. February 8th showed sustained winds of 15 to 20 miles per hour, gusting to 30. In a whiteout with those winds, visibility would have been near zero, Jensen said. Why would your brother drive onto a frozen lake in those conditions? Jake felt cold that had nothing to do with the February air. He wouldn't. David was careful, paranoid about ice, about winter driving. Then why was he out there? Jake stared at the SUV, at his brother's family preserved in their final moments. The question Jensen was asking was the one that had haunted him for 10 years. Why had David taken the lake road at all? And why, when he got to the lake, had he driven onto the ice instead of turning around? Detective, Jake said slowly. What if someone was chasing them? Detective Jensen and Jake spent the next hour walking the shoreline, looking for clues about how David's family had ended up on the ice in the first place. The access road to Copperhead Lake was barely 2 lanes, winding through dense spruce forest before opening onto a small clearing with a boat launch. In summer, it would be a popular fishing spot. In February, it was desolate. This is where they would have first seen the lake, Jensen said, standing at the tree line. Jake tried to imagine it. David behind the wheel, Sarah checking the map, Katie and Tommy arguing in the back seat about something trivial. A normal family on a normal drive, following directions their uncle had given them. The ice would have looked solid from here, Jake said, especially with snow cover. Jensen nodded. But look at the shoreline. She pointed to tire tracks in the snow, not fresh, but not 10 years old either. Multiple sets coming and going from the boat launch area. Someone's been using this road regularly, she said. They followed the tracks toward the lake. Near the water's edge, the tracks led onto the ice itself, or what had been ice 10 years ago. Jake, look at this. Jensen knelt beside a wooden post driven into the frozen ground. It was weathered, old, but still standing. A metal sign was bolted to it, the paint faded, but still readable. Danger. Thin ice. No vehicles beyond this point. That sign was here in 2007, Jake said, reading the installation date stamped in small print at the bottom. So your brother would have seen it. Jake felt sick. David would never have ignored a warning like that. He was cautious, responsible, the kind of driver who checked weather reports twice before making any winter trip. "Detective, David wouldn't have driven past this sign. Not willingly." Jensen studied the post, the tire tracks, the layout of the shoreline. Then someone made him. They walked further along the ice edge, following the old tire tracks. About 50 yards from the boat launch, Jensen stopped. "Jake, look at this." In the snow beside the lake, partially hidden by 10 years of accumulation and melt, was a piece of metal. Jensen brushed away the snow with her gloved hand. It was a license plate. Alaska plates, but not from David's SUV. The numbers were corroded, but still visible. HBZ847. "Run the plate," Jake said. Jensen was already on her radio, calling it into the state police database. The response came back within minutes. Registered to a 2005 Ford pickup. Owner, Harlan McBride. Jake felt the name hit him like a physical blow. Hawk McBride. "You know him?" "He worked at the railroad when I did." Freight coordinator. Always knew the back roads. Jake's mind was racing. Hawk McBride, the quiet guy with the baseball cap who always had advice about shortcuts and scenic routes. "Detective, Hawk's the one who told me about the lake road." "You're sure?" "I remember now. It was in the break room maybe a week before David called. Hawk said the Copperhead Lake route was faster than the highway. Said it was prettier. Cut 20 minutes off the drive to Anchorage." Jensen looked at the license plate, then back at the warning sign. "So McBride fed you false information about the route, then he was here the night your brother's family disappeared." "But why?" Before Jensen could answer, her radio crackled. "Detective Jensen, this is Officer Mitchell at the recovery site. You need to get back here. We found something inside the vehicle." They hurried back to the dive site. The teal SUV now sat on a flatbed trailer, water still dripping from the undercarriage. Crime scene techs were carefully documenting everything before opening the doors. Officer Mitchell met them at the trailer. He was holding an evidence bag with something small inside. "Found this wedged under the driver's seat," he said. Through the plastic, Jake could see a cell phone. Old model, the kind people used in 2007. "It's not David's phone," Jake said. "His was never found." Jensen took the bag, examined the phone through the plastic. "This is a burner. Prepaid. Untraceable." "Why would my brother have a burner phone?" "He wouldn't," Jensen said grimly. "Someone else put this in the car." She looked at the phone's screen, still visible through the evidence bag. The last call in the log showed a timestamp. February 8th, 2007, 3:42 p.m. "That's about the time your brother's family would have reached the lake," Jensen said. "Who was he calling?" Jensen's radio crackled again. This time it was the crime scene tech working on the SUV's interior. "Detective, you need to see this. We found something else." They approached the vehicle carefully. The tech had opened the driver's door and was pointing to something on the floor. "Zip ties," the tech said. "Cut, like someone's hands were bound and then freed." Jake stared at the plastic ties. They were kidnapped. "Looks that way. Someone took your brother's family, brought them here, forced them onto the ice." Jensen walked around to the passenger side, peered through the window. "And then what? Just let them drive into the lake?" "No," Jake said, understanding flooding through him. "They made David drive onto the ice. Probably held a gun on his family, told him to keep driving or they'd shoot Sarah and the kids." The picture was becoming clear, horrible, and undeniable. David, desperate to save his family, following orders from someone who knew the ice was too thin to support the SUV's weight. "It was execution," Jake said, disguised as an accident. Jensen's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then her face went pale. "That was the lab," she said after hanging up. "They ran the prints on that burner phone." "And?" "Harlan McBride. His prints are all over it." Jake felt rage building in his chest. 10 years of guilt. 10 years of believing he'd killed his family with careless advice when the truth was that someone had used him. Someone had fed him false information specifically so he'd pass it along to David. "Where is he?" Jake asked. "Where's Hawk McBride?" Jensen was already working her phone, pulling up current address information. According to DMV records, he lives about 20 miles from here. Rural address. Let's go. "Jake, this is police business now. You can't—" "He used me to kill my family," Jake said, his voice cold as the February air. "I'm going to ask him why." Jensen studied Jake's face, saw the determination there. The same look David had probably worn that last day when he decided to do the right thing no matter what it cost. "We go together," she said finally. "And we do this by the book." Jake nodded, but privately he was making a different promise. Hawk McBride had spent 10 years thinking he'd gotten away with murder. He was about to find out how wrong he was. In the distance, the afternoon sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Copperhead Lake. The same sun that had been setting 10 years ago when David's family took their last breath. But now, finally, someone was going to answer for that. Jake looked one more time at the teal SUV on its trailer, at the evidence of his brother's final moments. "I'm sorry, David," he whispered. "I should have figured it out sooner." But maybe, Jake thought as they walked toward Jensen's cruiser, maybe he was finally going to make it right. Harlan McBride's house sat at the end of a gravel road, 20 miles of switchbacks through dense forest that made Jake's stomach churn with each turn. The kind of remote location where a man could do whatever he wanted without neighbors asking questions. Detective Jensen drove in silence, her service weapon visible in its holster, radio turned low but active. Jake sat in the passenger seat, hands clenched in his lap, trying to process 10 years of misdirected guilt. Hawk had played him, fed him false information about the lake route, knowing Jake would pass it along to David when asked. It was premeditated, calculated murder disguised as helpful advice between coworkers. "You okay?" Jensen asked, glancing at him. "I keep thinking about all the times I blamed myself," Jake said. "All the nights I sat in my cabin drinking, convinced I'd killed them with stupid advice." "You couldn't have known." "Couldn't I? I recommended a route I'd never driven based on information from a guy I barely knew. That was careless enough." Jensen slowed the cruiser as they approached a rusted mailbox marked H. McBride. The driveway was a pair of tire ruts disappearing into the trees. "Jake, when we get in there, let me do the talking. This is a homicide investigation now, and I need everything to be admissible in court." Jake nodded, but his jaw was tight. He'd spent 10 years wanting to apologize to someone for his brother's death. Now he had someone to apologize to, and an apology wasn't what he wanted to give. The house was small, weathered, surrounded by the accumulated junk of someone who never threw anything away. Old trucks, boat trailers, stacks of equipment under tarps, the kind of place that screamed, "Leave me alone." Jensen parked next to a newer pickup truck, a 2015 Ford, license plate HBZ 948, close enough to the plate they'd found at the lake to be from the same person. "He's home," she said. They approached the front door together. Jensen kept her hand near her weapon, but not on it. Professional caution, not paranoia. Jake could hear movement inside the house. Footsteps, the sound of a television being turned off, someone watching them through the window. Jensen knocked. "Mr. McBride, Alaska State Police. We'd like to speak with you." The door opened after a long moment. Harlan McBride stood in the doorway, older and grayer than Jake remembered, but with the same sharp eyes. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, work boots that had seen better years. His gaze moved from Jensen to Jake, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, then calculation. "Jake Whitford," Hawk said. His voice was exactly the same, quiet, controlled, giving nothing away. "I heard on the news about them finding your brother's car." "Mr. McBride," Jensen said, showing her badge. "I'm Detective Jensen. We're investigating the deaths of the Whitford family. We'd like to ask you some questions." Hawk stepped back from the door. Come in, I guess, though I don't know what help I can be. That was 10 years ago. The interior of the house was neat but sparse. Furniture that had seen decades of use, walls lined with hunting and fishing photos, the kind of place a man lived when he wanted to be forgotten. You worked with Jake at the railroad in 2007, Jensen said, settling into a chair across from Hawk. That's right. Freight coordination. Jake was maintenance crew. Jensen pulled out a notebook. Did you and Jake ever discuss driving routes? Back roads, shortcuts, that kind of thing? Hawk's eyes flicked to Jake, then back to Jensen. Sure. Guys talked about roads all the time. Long shifts. You talk about whatever. Do you remember telling Jake about the Copperhead Lake route? A pause. Too long. Might have. I knew a lot of roads back then. Jake couldn't stay quiet any longer. You told me it was faster than the highway. You said it cut 20 minutes off the drive to Anchorage. Hawk looked at him with flat, emotionless eyes. Did I? Hard to remember casual conversations from 10 years ago. It wasn't casual, Jake said, his voice rising. You made a point of it. Said the lake route was prettier, faster. Jake, Jensen warned. But Hawk was smiling now, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. Your brother made his own choices, Jake. Nobody forced him to drive onto that ice. Didn't they? Jensen pulled out an evidence bag containing the burner phone. We found this in David Whitford's SUV. Your fingerprints are all over it. The smile disappeared from Hawk's face. I've never seen that phone before. Your prints say otherwise. This phone made a call at 3:42 p.m. on February 8, 2007, right around the time the Whitford family reached Copperhead Lake. Hawk was quiet for a long moment, staring at the evidence bag. You want to tell us about that call? Jensen asked. I want to call my lawyer. That's your right. But Mr. McBride, we also found your license plate at the lake, HBZ 847. Want to explain how it got there? Hawk stood up from his chair. I think this conversation is over. Sit down, Jensen said, her hand moving to her weapon. We're not done. But Jake was already moving. 10 years of rage, 10 years of guilt, 10 years of believing he'd killed his brother's family, all of it focused on the man standing across from him. You used me, Jake said, stepping toward Hawk. You fed me lies, so I'd send them to die. Jake, back off, Jensen warned. Hawk's hand moved toward a drawer in the kitchen counter. Jensen saw it too. Don't, she said, drawing her weapon. Hands where I can see them. But Hawk was already pulling something from the drawer. Not a gun, but a manila folder. He threw it on the kitchen table. You want to know why? He said. Look at that. Jensen approached carefully, keeping her weapon trained on Hawk. She opened the folder with one hand. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. All showing the same thing. Trucks dumping barrels into Copperhead Lake. Industrial waste, chemical containers, the kind of illegal disposal that poisoned wilderness for generations. Hazardous waste disposal, Hawk said. 50 grand a load. I was making more money in a month than the railroad paid in a year. Jake stared at the photos. You were poisoning the lake. I was providing a service. Companies in Fairbanks, Anchorage, even Seattle. They all had waste they couldn't dispose of legally. I made their problems disappear. Jensen flipped through the photos. For how long? 3 years? Would have been longer, but your brother had to be a hero. Jake felt the pieces clicking together. David saw you dumping. February 7th. I was running a late delivery. Thought the lake was deserted. But there was your brother, parked at the tree line with his fancy camera, taking pictures of my operation. Hawk's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was describing a business transaction. I tried to reason with him, offered him money to forget what he'd seen. But David got all righteous, said he was going to report it to the EPA. So you killed him, Jake said. I defended my business interests. Simple as that. Jensen was already on her radio, calling for backup. But Jake wasn't listening to procedure anymore. How? He asked. How did you do it? Hawk smiled that cold smile again. Easy. I knew David would call you for road advice. You were always the little brother who knew shortcuts. So I planted the idea about the lake road weeks in advance, made sure you'd recommend it when asked. And then? Then I waited at the lake. When David's family showed up, I told them they were under arrest for trespassing on a federal investigation site, showed them fake federal badges, zip-tied their hands, put them in their own car. Jake's vision went red. You made David drive onto the ice. I told him to drive straight across the lake or I'd shoot his wife and kids. The ice was already compromised from the warm weather. I knew it wouldn't hold the weight of an SUV. Hawk shrugged. David had a choice. He could have refused, let me shoot his family quickly. Instead, he chose to hope the ice would hold. Poor judgment. Jake lunged across the room. He slammed into Hawk before Jensen could stop him, both men crashing into the kitchen counter. "Jake, stop!" Jensen shouted. But Jake was past hearing. 10 years of guilt, 10 years of grief, all focused on the man who'd used him to murder his family. His hands found Hawk's throat. Squeezed. Hawk's eyes went wide, then calculating. Even with Jake's hands around his neck, the man looked like he was solving a problem. Jensen grabbed Jake's shoulders, tried to pull him off. "He's not worth it, Jake. Let the courts handle this." Jake squeezed harder. Hawk's face was turning purple. Then Hawk whispered something that made Jake freeze. "They're not all dead." Jake's hands loosened around Hawk's throat. "What did you say?" Hawk gasped, rubbing his neck where finger marks were already darkening. But his eyes held that same cold calculation. "I said they're not all dead." Detective Jensen had her weapon trained on both of them now. "Jake, step back. Now." But Jake couldn't move. The words echoed in his head like a physical blow. "That's impossible. We saw the bodies, all 4 of them." Hawk straightened his shirt, that terrible smile returning. "You saw what you expected to see, but did you count carefully? Did you really look?" Jensen stepped closer, weapon still drawn. "Explain. Right now." Hawk walked to the kitchen window, stared out at the forest beyond his property. "Your brother was a problem, but his wife and kids, they were leverage." "Leverage for what?" "David saw my operation, started taking pictures. I couldn't let him report it." "But killing a whole family?" "That brings attention. Federal investigation, media coverage, the kind of heat that shuts down profitable businesses." Jake felt sick. "So you kept them alive." "I kept the woman and boy alive. The girl, she tried to run that first night, made too much noise." Jake's chest went tight. "Katie, 17 years old, probably terrified, trying to escape." "You killed her," Hawk shrugged. "She made her choice." Jensen's radio crackled. Backup was still 10 minutes out, but Jake couldn't wait 10 minutes, couldn't wait 10 seconds. "Where are they?" he demanded. "Where are Sarah and Tommy?" "Safe, federal, warm." Hawk's smile widened. "For now." "Where?" "That depends on you, Jake. See, I've been watching the news, watching this investigation unfold, and I realize I have an opportunity here." Jensen stepped forward. "What kind of opportunity?" "The kind where everyone gets what they want. I tell you where the woman and boy are, and you all walk away from the illegal dumping investigation." Jake stared at him. "You want to make a deal?" "I want to continue my business operations without interference. Sarah and Tommy are my insurance policy." "They've been prisoners for 10 years, Jensen said. Kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment." "They've been guests," Hawk corrected. "Well-treated guests who understand the consequences of trying to leave." Jake's mind reeled. Sarah alive. Tommy alive. After 10 years of believing they were dead, of carrying their deaths as his burden. "Prove it," he said. Hawk walked to another drawer, pulled out a digital camera, turned on the display screen. The first photo showed a small cabin in dense woods, basic but clean, with a wood stove and simple furniture. The second photo showed a woman sitting at a kitchen table, older, thinner, but unmistakably Sarah. Her blonde hair was streaked with gray now, her face lined with a decade of captivity, but alive. The third photo showed a teenage boy chopping wood outside the cabin. Tall, lean, with David's dark hair and stubborn jaw. Tommy, 18 years old now, grown up in captivity. Jesus Christ, Jake whispered. Recent photos, Hawk said. Taken last week. They're healthy, fed, content with their situation. Content? Jake's voice cracked. They're prisoners? They're survivors, and they'll continue surviving as long as certain agreements are maintained. Jensen's weapon never wavered. Where's the cabin? About 30 miles from here, remote, off-grid. They have everything they need. Except freedom. Hawk's expression didn't change. Freedom's overrated. They have safety, security, purpose, more than most people. Jake studied the photos on the camera display. Sarah looked older, worn down, but there was something in her eyes. Not defeat, determination. She's been planning, Jake said. What? Sarah, look at her eyes. She's been planning something. Hawk glanced at the camera, frowned. Planning what? Escape. She's just been waiting for the right moment. That's impossible. The cabin's 15 miles from the nearest road. Dense forest, no landmarks. Even if they got out, they'd die of exposure before anyone found them. But Jake knew Sarah, knew how stubborn she could be, how protective of her children. If Tommy was alive, she'd been fighting to save him for 10 years. Detective Jensen, Jake said, we need to get to that cabin, now. Not until we have backup. A sound interrupted her, distant but unmistakable, the crack of gunfire echoing through the forest. Hawk's face went white. That came from the direction of the cabin. More shots, then silence. Someone's at the cabin, Jensen said. Hawk was already moving toward the door. If something happens to them, you get nothing. No evidence, no witnesses, no case. Jake grabbed Hawk's arm. Who else knows about the cabin? No one, just me. Then who's shooting? Hawk's answer was lost in the sound of an explosion, distant but powerful enough to rattle the windows of the house. The cabin, Hawk said, his voice hollow. Someone just blew up the cabin. Jensen was on her radio, calling for emergency response teams, fire department, ambulance, but Jake was already running toward the door. Jake, wait. But he couldn't wait. Sarah and Tommy had been alive for 10 years, prisoners in a cabin he'd never known existed, and now someone was trying to kill them. Unless... Jake stopped at Hawk's truck, looked back at the man who'd destroyed his family. Who else was involved in the dumping operation? What? You didn't do this alone. Hazardous waste disposal, federal crimes. You had partners. Who were they? Hawk's silence was answer enough. They're cleaning house, Jake said, getting rid of witnesses. No, they don't know about... Another explosion cut him off. This one closer. Jensen grabbed Jake's arm. We're leaving. All of us. Right now. They piled into Jensen's cruiser, Jake in front, Hawk in the back seat with his hands zip-tied. Jensen hit the sirens and floored it toward the forest road. How do we get to the cabin? She asked. North Logging Road, Hawk said, about 20 miles, then a hiking trail. Can we drive the trail? Not in a cruiser, too narrow. Jake looked at the speedometer. Jensen was doing 60 on a gravel road, trees flashing past the windows like fence posts. Detective, what if we're too late? Then we're too late, but we have to try. In the back seat, Hawk was staring out the window. For the first time since they'd met him, he looked genuinely worried. They were never supposed to be hurt, he said quietly. The deal was they stay hidden, stay quiet, and everyone stays alive. What deal? Jensen asked. Who did you make a deal with? People who paid me to make problems disappear. People who don't like loose ends. Jake felt ice in his stomach. How long have they known about Sarah and Tommy? They didn't. I never told them the family survived. Then how did they find out? Hawk met Jake's eyes in the rearview mirror. Someone's been watching, following the investigation, They probably figured it out when you started asking questions. Jake understood. By searching for the truth about David's death, he'd led killers straight to the family members who'd survived. The people he'd spent 10 years trying to save were about to die because he'd tried to save them. "Drive faster," Jake said. Jensen pressed the accelerator. The cruiser shot through the forest like a bullet, racing against time and Jake's worst fears. Behind them, smoke was beginning to rise above the tree line. The logging road ended at a steel gate, chained shut with a sign reading, "No trespassing, private property." Beyond it, a narrow dirt trail disappeared into dense forest. Jensen cut the engine. In the sudden silence, they could hear it, the crackle of flames somewhere ahead, the occasional pop of burning timber. "How far to the cabin?" Jensen asked. "Maybe 2 miles, Hawk said from the back seat, "but the trail's rough, 30 minutes on foot, minimum." Jake was already out of the cruiser, studying the gate. The chain was old but solid. "We need bolt cutters." "I've got something better." Jensen popped the trunk, pulled out a crowbar. "Stand back." She wedged the bar between the chain links and the gate post, put her full weight behind it. The chain snapped with a metallic ping. They started up the trail at a fast walk, Jensen leading with her weapon drawn, Jake behind her, Hawk bringing up the rear with his hands still zip-tied. The trail was narrow, overgrown, the kind of path hunters use to access remote areas. Pine branches scraped at their jackets, and the footing was treacherous with hidden roots and loose rocks. "Who else knew about this place?" Jensen asked as they climbed. "Nobody," Hawk said. "I built it myself off the books. No permits, no inspections. But someone found it. Someone followed the investigation, figured out Sarah and Tommy were still alive." Jake's mind was racing. The illegal dumping operation, the murder of his family, the 10-year cover-up. It was all connected to something bigger. "Hawk, who paid you to dump the waste? What companies?" "Different ones. Medical facilities in Fairbanks, mining operations, chemical plants in Anchorage." "Names." "I don't remember all of them. It was 10 years ago." Jensen stopped walking, turned around. "Try harder." Hawk was breathing hard from the climb, sweat beading on his forehead despite the February cold. "Northland Medical was the biggest client. They paid top dollar for specialized disposal." "Northland Medical," Jake repeated. "Vincent Torres's company." "You know Torres?" "We know of him. What else?" "Arctic Mining Solutions, Fairbanks Industrial Cleaning, a bunch of smaller outfits." Hawk paused, looking genuinely worried for the first time. But Torres was the money behind it all. He coordinated everything. Jake felt the pieces clicking together. So when we started investigating the lake, Torres realized his whole operation was at risk. "More than that," Jensen said. "If Sarah and Tommy testify about being held prisoner for 10 years, it connects Torres directly to kidnapping and murder." So he decided to eliminate the witnesses. They crested a ridge and could see smoke rising through the trees ahead. Thick black smoke that spoke of structures burning, not just forest fire. "We're close," Hawk said. Jensen called for backup again, but they were still 20 minutes out, minimum. She looked at Jake. "We go in careful. No heroics." But as they approached the clearing where the cabin sat, Jake could see they were too late for careful. The cabin was fully engulfed in flames. The roof had already collapsed, and the walls were starting to cave in. Whatever had been inside was lost. "Sarah!" Jake shouted, running toward the burning structure. Jensen grabbed his arm. "Jake, stop!" "The building's not stable." But Jake pulled free, circling the cabin, looking for any sign of survivors. The heat was intense, the smoke choking, but he had to know. Behind the cabin, he found tire tracks in the snow. Fresh ones, multiple vehicles. "Jensen, over here." She ran to where Jake was kneeling beside the tracks. 2 sets of tire prints, leading away from the cabin toward another trail. "They got out," Jake said. "Someone took them." "Or rescued them," Jensen said. Hawk caught up to them, panting. There's another trail back there, leads to an old mining road. Where does the mining road go? Eventually connects to the highway, but there are a dozen branch roads, abandoned campsites, old hunting cabins. Jensen was already on her radio, calling in the vehicle descriptions, requesting roadblocks. But Jake knew it was probably too late. Whoever had taken Sarah and Tommy had a head start and knew the area. "Hawk," Jake said. "If Torres wanted to eliminate witnesses, where would he take them?" "I don't know. This was never part of the plan." What was the plan? Hawk looked at the burning cabin, his face grim. Keep them hidden until the statute of limitations ran out on the dumping charges. Then maybe relocate them somewhere far away. The statute of limitations is 7 years for most federal environmental crimes, Jensen said. That expired 3 years ago. So why keep them alive after that? "Insurance," Hawk said quietly. "As long as they were alive, I had leverage against Torres. If he ever tried to cut me out of the operation..." Jake felt sick. "You were blackmailing him." "I was protecting my business interests." "By keeping my sister-in-law and nephew prisoner for 10 years. By keeping them alive when Torres would have had them killed." A new sound interrupted them, helicopter rotors approaching fast from the south. "That's not ours," Jensen said, checking her radio. "Our backup is still ground-based." The helicopter appeared over the tree line, black, unmarked, moving with military precision. It circled the burning cabin once, then landed in the clearing. 2 men in tactical gear got out, weapons drawn. "Down on the ground!" one of them shouted. "Hands visible!" Jensen had her badge out, her service weapon lowered but ready. "Alaska State Police, identify yourselves." "Private security," the lead man called back. "We're here to secure a crime scene." "Whose crime scene?" "Vincent Torres has a legal interest in this property." Jake felt anger building in his chest. Torres's men, here to clean up the mess, to make sure no evidence survived that could connect their boss to 10 years of kidnapping and murder. "Where are the prisoners?" Jake shouted. The tactical team leader looked genuinely confused. "What prisoners?" "Sarah and Tommy Whitford. They were being held here." "Sir, we were told this was an abandoned structure used for illegal activities. No mention of prisoners." Jensen stepped forward, badge clearly visible. "I'm Detective Sarah Jensen, Alaska State Police. This is an active homicide investigation. I need you to stand down." The team leader spoke into his radio, listened to a response Jake couldn't hear. "Detective Jensen, we have orders to secure this site until federal investigators arrive." "What federal investigators?" "EPA, FBI. Apparently, this site was used for illegal dumping operations." Jake realized what was happening. Torres was using legitimate federal agencies to cover his tracks. The environmental crime investigation would focus on the dumping, not the kidnapping. Any evidence of Sarah and Tommy's imprisonment would be buried under federal bureaucracy. "They're not here to help," Jake said. "They're here to make sure we don't find Sarah and Tommy." Jensen's hand moved to her weapon. "Sir, I'm ordering you to leave this scene. Now." "I'm afraid I can't do that, Detective." The standoff stretched for a long moment. 2 armed groups, each believing they had legal authority, each protecting different interests. Then Hawk McBride did something unexpected. He ran. With his hands still zip-tied behind his back, he sprinted toward the tree line, crashing through undergrowth like a man running for his life. "Stop!" Jensen shouted. But one of the tactical team members was already moving, raising his weapon. The shot echoed through the forest. Hawk McBride pitched forward, hit the ground, and lay still. "Jesus Christ," Jensen breathed. The team leader spoke into his radio again. "Target down. Scene secure." Jake stared at Hawk's body, at the man who'd held the key to finding Sarah and Tommy. The only person who knew where Torres might have taken them. Now he was dead, and they were back to searching thousands of square miles of Alaskan wilderness for 2 people who might already be dead themselves. "Detective Jensen," the team leader said, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the area. This is now a federal crime scene." But Jake wasn't listening to procedure anymore. Sarah and Tommy were alive, had been alive an hour ago, and he wasn't going to let them disappear again, not after 10 years, not ever. Jake didn't wait for Jensen's response to the federal agents. While she was arguing jurisdiction and demanding to see credentials, he slipped into the tree line and started following the fresh tire tracks. The trail was easy to read in the snow. 2 vehicles, heavy, moving fast. One set of tracks was wider, probably a pickup truck. The other looked like an SUV, based on the wheel spacing. Jake moved quickly but quietly through the forest, following the tracks as they wound between the trees. Behind him, he could hear voices. Jensen still arguing with Torres's men, demanding they secure Hawk's body as evidence. But Jake knew those men weren't there to preserve evidence. They were there to destroy it. The tire tracks led to a wider trail, then to a gravel road that connected to the mining access route Hawk had mentioned. Here, Jake could see where the vehicles had stopped. Boot prints in the snow, cigarette butts, signs of a brief conference. Then the tracks split. One vehicle had gone north, toward the main highway. The other had headed east, deeper into the wilderness. Jake knelt beside the tracks, trying to read the story they told. The eastbound vehicle was riding lower, its tires cutting deeper into the gravel, carrying more weight, carrying passengers. Jake pulled out his phone, called Jensen. "Where the hell are you?" she answered. Following the tracks, they split at the mining road. One vehicle went toward the highway, the other headed east into the backcountry. "Jake, get back here. We need to coordinate with—" "No time. Sarah and Tommy are in the eastbound vehicle. I can feel it." "You can't track armed men alone. Wait for backup." Jake looked at the tracks disappearing into the wilderness. Every minute he delayed was a minute farther away Sarah and Tommy got from rescue. "Detective, those federal agents aren't federal. They work for Torres, and they just murdered the only witness who could lead us to my family." "I know. I'm calling the real FBI, but by the time they sort out jurisdiction and paperwork, Sarah and Tommy will be dead." Jake ended the call, turned off his phone. He couldn't afford the distraction, and he couldn't risk Torres's men tracking the signal. The eastbound trail was old, probably used by hunters and mining crews decades ago. It wound through dense forest, climbing steadily toward the mountains. Jake moved at a steady jog, following the tire tracks, stopping occasionally to listen for engine sounds. After an hour, he found where the vehicle had stopped again. This time, there were more boot prints, and something else. Drops of blood in the snow. Someone was hurt. Jake examined the blood drops, fresh, bright red against the white snow. The pattern suggested someone bleeding from a head wound, drops falling as they walked. The boot prints led away from the vehicle tracks toward a cluster of buildings visible through the trees. An old mining camp, probably abandoned for years. Jake approached carefully, staying in the tree cover. The camp consisted of 3 buildings, a main structure that might have been a bunkhouse, a smaller building that looked like equipment storage, and what appeared to be a generator shack. Smoke was rising from the chimney of the main building. Someone was inside. Jake circled the camp, looking for guards, for signs of how many people were there. He found a single vehicle parked behind the equipment shed, a black SUV with mud-covered plates. Only one vehicle, which meant either the other had left or this wasn't where Sarah and Tommy had been taken. But the blood trail led directly to the main building's front door. Jake crept closer, staying low, using the equipment shed for cover. Through a grimy window, he could see into the main building. 2 men in winter gear standing near a wood stove. One was talking on a satellite phone, the other was cleaning a rifle. And sitting on a bench against the far wall, hands zip-tied, were 2 figures. A woman with graying blonde hair, wearing a heavy coat that had seen better years. A young man, tall and lean, with dark hair and his father's stubborn jaw. Sarah and Tommy. Alive. Jake's chest tightened with emotion he'd kept buried for 10 years. His sister-in-law, his nephew, prisoners, but breathing. Older, worn down by captivity, but alive. Sarah's head was tilted back against the wall, and Jake could see a cut on her forehead, the source of the blood trail. She looked exhausted but alert, her eyes tracking the movements of their captors. Tommy was sitting straighter, tense, like a spring ready to release. Even tied up, he looked ready to fight. Jake studied the guards, both armed, both professional. But they were relaxed, confident. They didn't expect rescue this deep in the wilderness. That was their mistake. Jake circled to the back of the building, looking for another entrance. He found a door that probably led to a storage room or kitchen area. The lock was old, corroded. A few minutes with his pocket knife, and he had it open. Inside, the building was warm, heated by the wood stove in the main room. Jake could hear voices now, the guards talking in low tones. "Supposed to be here in an hour," one was saying. "Then we torch the place and head back." "What about the bodies?" "Boss wants them found eventually. Make it look like they were hiding out here, died in a fire. Accident. After 10 years of hiding, they just happened to die in a fire the day the investigation heats up?" "Not our problem. We follow orders." Jake moved through the storage room, found a connecting door to the main area. Through the crack, he could see the guards clearly now. One was by the window, rifle slung over his shoulder, watching the trail. The other was still on the satellite phone, his pistol holstered but visible. Sarah and Tommy were 15 feet away, close to the wood stove. Jake needed a distraction, something to draw both guards away from the prisoners, give him a chance to free Sarah and Tommy. He looked around the storage room. Old mining equipment, rusty tools, containers of lamp oil from decades past. Lamp oil. Jake grabbed 2 containers, crept to the back door. Outside, he could see the generator shack, probably still containing fuel lines and electrical equipment. If he could create a fire, an explosion, something urgent enough to draw both guards outside. Jake poured lamp oil around the base of the generator shack, struck a match. The flames caught immediately, racing along the oil trail toward the building. Within seconds, the old wooden structure was burning. Inside the main building, someone shouted, "What the hell?" "Generator's on fire. If it reaches the fuel tank—" Both guards rushed outside, weapons ready, looking for threats. Jake slipped through the connecting door into the main room. Sarah saw him first. Her eyes went wide, then filled with tears. "Jake," she whispered. "It's me." Jake cut her zip ties with his knife, then moved to Tommy. Up close, his nephew looked like David. Same dark eyes, same determined expression, but older, hardened by 10 years of captivity. "Uncle Jake," Tommy said quietly. "Mom said you'd come someday. We need to move. Now." Jake led them toward the storage room, toward the back door. Behind them, he could hear the guards shouting, trying to organize a response to the fire. "The fuel tank's gonna blow. Get the truck." Perfect. In the confusion, they might have a chance to escape. But as they reached the storage room, Jake heard the worst sound possible. More engines. Multiple vehicles approaching the camp. Torres's backup had arrived. "This way," Jake whispered, leading Sarah and Tommy toward a broken window in the storage room. They climbed through into the forest behind the camp. Jake could see headlights now, vehicles approaching on the main trail. "Can you run?" he asked Sarah. "I've been waiting 10 years to run," she said. They moved into the dense trees, putting distance between themselves and the burning camp. Behind them, Jake could hear vehicles arriving, men shouting orders, the organized chaos of a manhunt beginning. But for the first time in 10 years, they were together. Sarah and Tommy were free, and Jake was finally going to bring his family home. They ran through the forest for 20 minutes before Sarah collapsed against a fallen log, gasping for breath. 10 years of captivity had taken its toll. She was thin, weak, her endurance depleted. "I can't," she panted. "Need to rest." Jake knelt beside her, checked the cut on her forehead. It was still bleeding, but not badly. "What happened? How did you get hurt?" "One of Torres's men hit me with his rifle butt when I tried to protect Tommy," Sarah said. Her voice was hoarse, worn down by years of forced silence. Tommy sat beside his mother, his jaw tight with anger. "They killed Hawk this morning, shot him right in front of us." "We know. We were there." "You were there?" Sarah looked at Jake with confusion. "How did you find us?" Jake helped her take small sips from his water bottle. "We found David's car under the ice at Copperhead Lake." Sarah's face crumpled. "David's really dead?" "Yeah, I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I knew. I saw them shoot him, but for 10 years I kept hoping maybe—" Tommy put his arm around his mother. Even at 18, even after everything he'd endured, he was still protective of her. "What about Katie?" Jake asked gently. Sarah's tears came harder. "She tried to escape the second night. Hawk caught her about a mile from the cabin. He said she was too much trouble." Jake closed his eyes. Katie, 17 and brave and stubborn like her father, dying alone in the wilderness because she refused to give up. "I should have tried harder to save her," Sarah whispered. "You saved Tommy," Jake said. "You kept him alive for 10 years. David would be proud." In the distance they could hear dogs barking, search dogs, tracking their scent through the forest. "We need to keep moving," Jake said. Tommy stood up, helped his mother to her feet. "Which way?" Jake checked his compass, tried to orient himself. They were maybe 5 miles from the nearest road, but Torres's men would have that covered by now. "We need to get to higher ground," Jake said. "Find a place we can see them coming." They climbed through dense forest, Tommy supporting his mother when the terrain got steep. Jake marveled at the young man's strength, physically and emotionally. 10 years of captivity, watching his mother suffer, knowing his father and sister were dead, and he was still fighting. "Tommy," Jake said as they climbed, "what did they tell you about the outside world?" "Hawk said our family was dead, said nobody was looking for us, said if we ever tried to leave, they'd hunt us down and kill us." "Did you believe him?" Tommy was quiet for a moment. "Mom never did. She always said you'd figure it out eventually, said you wouldn't give up." Jake felt a stab of guilt. It had taken him 10 years to figure it out. 10 years of Sarah and Tommy living as prisoners while he wallowed in self-blame. "I'm sorry it took so long." "You're here now," Sarah said simply. "That's what matters." They reached a ridge that gave them a view back toward the mining camp. Jake could see at least 6 vehicles now, men with flashlights spreading out in search patterns. "They've got the main trails covered," Jake said. "But there's another way." He pointed toward a steep ravine that cut through the forest to the north. "That creek leads to the Richardson Highway, about 8 miles, but most of it's downhill." 8 miles through snow and brush, Tommy said. "Mom's not strong enough." Sarah straightened up, some of her old fire returning. "I've been strong enough to survive 10 years. I can handle 8 miles." But Jake could see she was struggling. The cut on her head, the years of poor nutrition, the emotional trauma. She needed medical attention, not a forced march through wilderness. His phone buzzed. He'd turned it back on to check for messages from Jensen. 3 missed calls, 2 text messages. The first text, "FBI en route. Don't do anything stupid." The second text, "Torres's men have roadblocks on all major routes. Stay hidden." Jake typed back, "Found Sarah and Tommy, both alive. Need extraction." Jensen's response came immediately. "Where?" Jake gave their approximate coordinates, then added, "Torres has search teams with dogs, running out of time. FBI has helicopters 30 minutes out. Can you stay hidden that long?" Jake looked at Sarah, exhausted and bleeding. At Tommy, strong but protective of his mother. At the lights moving through the forest below them. "We'll try." He turned to Sarah and Tommy. "Help's coming. We just need to stay ahead of the search teams for 30 minutes. "I can't run anymore," Sarah said. "Then we don't run. We hide." Jake led them down into the ravine, where the creek had carved a deep channel through the forest. The banks were steep, covered with dense brush and fallen trees. "Here," Jake said, pointing to an overhang created by a massive fallen spruce. "We can hide under there." They crawled into the natural shelter. It was cold, damp, but concealed from view. Jake arranged branches to further camouflage the entrance. Above them, they could hear the search teams getting closer. Voices, radio chatter, the baying of tracking dogs. "Mom," Tommy whispered, "remember when Dad used to take us camping?" Sarah smiled despite their situation. "You hated it, said the woods were too quiet." "I was 8. Everything seemed too quiet after living in town." Jake listened to them talk, mother and son sharing memories that had sustained them through 10 years of captivity. David would have been proud of both of them. The voices above got louder. Flashlight beams swept through the trees, moving closer to their hiding spot. "Track leads this way," someone called. "They're following the creek." Jake felt Sarah tense beside him. 10 years of hiding, of living in constant fear, and now they were fugitives again. But this time was different. This time they weren't alone. A dog barked, close enough that Jake could hear it panting. The search team was maybe 50 yards away, following their scent trail down the ravine. Jake's phone vibrated. Text from Jensen. "Helicopters inbound. Signal when safe." But signaling now would expose their position to Torres's men. The dog barked again. Closer. "They're going to find us," Tommy whispered. Jake looked at Sarah, at the nephew he'd thought was dead, at the family he'd spent 10 years mourning. "No," he said quietly, "they're not." He started to crawl out of their hiding place. "Where are you going?" Sarah grabbed his arm. "To buy you time." "Jake, no. We stay together." "I'm not losing you again?" Jake squeezed her hand, looked at Tommy. "Take care of your mother, and when you get home, tell everyone that your father died a hero." Before they could stop him, Jake crawled out of the shelter and started climbing up the opposite bank of the ravine, away from Sarah and Tommy, toward the search team. It was time to end this. Jake climbed out of the ravine and deliberately stepped on a dry branch. The crack echoed through the forest like a gunshot. "Over here!" a voice shouted. Movement on the north bank. Flashlight beams swung toward Jake's position. He let them catch a glimpse of him, then ducked behind a tree and started running parallel to the creek, away from Sarah and Tommy. The dog's barking grew frantic, pulling its handler toward Jake's new trail. Radio chatter filled the air as the search team redirected, following what they thought was their escaping prisoners. Jake ran hard, making no effort to hide his tracks. Every broken branch, every footprint in the snow, led the searchers further from the ravine where his family waited. Behind him, he could hear men crashing through the underbrush, following his deliberately obvious trail. The dog was getting closer, its handler struggling to keep up in the dense forest. Jake's phone buzzed. He ignored it, focused on putting distance between the search team and Sarah and Tommy. But then he heard something that made his blood freeze. "Sir, we've got thermal imaging from the helicopter. 3 heat signatures in the ravine, about 200 meters behind us." Thermal imaging. They could see Sarah and Tommy through their body heat, even hidden under the fallen tree. Jake stopped running. The diversion had failed. His phone rang. This time he answered. "Jensen." "Jake, where are you? The FBI helicopters are 2 minutes out." "Torres's men have thermal imaging. They found Sarah and Tommy." "Get out of there. We'll handle the extraction." "There's no time." Jake could see flashlights converging on the ravine where he'd left his family. 6, maybe 8 men, all armed, all moving with military precision. "Detective," Jake said, "tell the FBI that Vincent Torres murdered my brother and held my family prisoner for 10 years. Make sure everyone knows." "Jake, what are you—" Jake ended the call, turned off his phone. He started back toward the ravine, moving carefully now, using the forest for cover. The search team was spread out, focused on the thermal signatures below. They weren't watching their backs. Jake found a position on the ridge overlooking the ravine. He could see Sarah and Tommy's hiding spot, could see the men surrounding it. "Come out!" one of them shouted. "We know you're down there!" No response from the shelter. "You've got 30 seconds, then we start shooting." Jake picked up a rock, threw it hard into the trees 50 yards to his left. It crashed through branches, sounding like someone moving through the forest. Half the search team turned toward the sound, weapons raised. "Check it out," the team leader ordered. As 3 men moved toward the diversion, Jake slipped down into the ravine from the opposite side. He was 20 feet from Sarah and Tommy's hiding spot when the team leader lost patience. "Enough games," the man said, pulling out a grenade. "Fire in the hole!" Jake lunged from cover. "Sarah, run!" The grenade rolled toward the fallen tree shelter. Jake reached it first, grabbed it, threw it as hard as he could, back up the ravine wall. The explosion lit up the forest, showering everyone with dirt and debris. In the chaos, Sarah and Tommy crawled out of their shelter, ran toward Jake. "This way!" Jake shouted. They scrambled up the far bank of the ravine as gunfire erupted behind them. Muzzle flashes strobed through the trees, bullets whining overhead. "Keep running!" Jake pushed Tommy and Sarah ahead of him, using his body to shield them from the gunfire. Above them, Jake could hear the sound he'd been waiting for, helicopter rotors, multiple aircraft approaching fast. "FBI!" a voice boomed from a bullhorn. "Drop your weapons!" The gunfire behind them stopped. Jake looked back to see powerful searchlights sweeping the forest, men in tactical gear fast roping from helicopters. "Down here!" Jake shouted, waving his arms. "We're down here!" A searchlight found them, bathed them in brilliant white light. Jake put his hands up, helped Sarah and Tommy do the same. "3 civilians!" Jake shouted. "The Whitford family!" The helicopter settled into a clearing 50 yards away. FBI agents in full tactical gear moved toward them, weapons lowered but ready. "Jake Whitford?" the team leader called. "That's me." "Detective Jensen sends her regards. Let's get you out of here." As they walked toward the helicopter, Jake could see Torres's men being arrested throughout the forest. Hands zip-tied, weapons confiscated, the professional confidence replaced by the look of men who knew their operation was blown. Sarah stumbled, exhaustion finally overwhelming her. Jake caught her arm, helped her toward the aircraft. "Is it really over?" she asked. "It's over," Jake said. Tommy walked beside them, his young face showing a decade of premature aging, but also something Jake hadn't seen before: hope. "Uncle Jake," Tommy said as they reached the helicopter. "What happens now?" Jake helped Sarah into the aircraft, then turned to look at his nephew. 18 years old, strong despite everything he'd endured, ready to face a world he'd been hidden from for half his life. "Now we go home," Jake said, "and we start over." The helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from the forest that had been Sarah and Tommy's prison for 10 years. Through the window, Jake could see more FBI helicopters landing, agents securing the crime scene, beginning the investigation that would finally bring Vincent Torres to justice. Below them, Copperhead Lake was a dark mirror reflecting the stars. The same lake where David's car had waited under the ice, where Hawk McBride had dumped toxic waste, where a decade of lies had finally been exposed. But for the first time in 10 years, Jake wasn't looking backward. He was looking forward to a future where Sarah could heal, where Tommy could discover the world he'd been denied, where the Whitford family could finally find peace. Sarah reached over and squeezed Jake's hand. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were strong. "Thank you," she whispered over the helicopter noise. Jake squeezed back. "Thank you for staying alive. Thank you for keeping Tommy safe. Thank you for never giving up." Outside the helicopter windows, Alaska stretched endlessly in all directions. Wilderness and danger, but also beauty and freedom. They were going home. All of them. Finally. 6 months later, Jake sat on the porch of his cabin, watching Sarah tend the small garden she'd planted behind the house. She'd insisted on growing her own vegetables. 10 years of depending on others for food had left her determined to be self-sufficient. Her hair was lighter now, the gray less noticeable, and she'd gained back some of the weight she'd lost during captivity. But the real change was in her eyes. The constant watchfulness was fading, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. Tommy emerged from the woods carrying an armload of firewood. At 19 now, he was taller than his father had been, with David's broad shoulders and stubborn streak. He'd spent the spring learning everything he could about the world he'd missed. Cars, computers, smartphones, all the technology that had advanced while he was hidden away. But more than that, he was learning about freedom. The simple act of walking into town alone, of choosing what to eat for breakfast, of sleeping without listening for footsteps outside his door. "Uncle Jake," Tommy called, stacking the wood neatly beside the cabin. "Sarah Jensen called. She wants to know if we're ready for the trial next week." The trial. Vincent Torres and 3 of his associates facing charges of kidnapping, murder, conspiracy, and environmental crimes. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records, witness testimony, the toxic waste still being cleaned up from Copperhead Lake. Torres had tried to claim he knew nothing about Hawk McBride's side operations, that the illegal dumping was done without his knowledge. But the paper trail told a different story. Bank transfers, shipping manifests, recorded phone calls, all of it pointing back to the man who'd built his fortune on making problems disappear. "Are you ready?" Jake asked Sarah as she walked up from the garden, dirt under her fingernails, a small basket of lettuce in her hands. She set the basket on the porch railing, looked out at the valley beyond Jake's property. For a moment she was quiet, and Jake could see the old fear flickering in her eyes. "I used to dream about testifying," she said finally. "About standing up in court and telling everyone what they did to us. But now that it's here—" "You don't have to do it," Jake said. "The prosecutors have enough evidence without your testimony." "No," Sarah's voice was firm. "I need to do this. Tommy needs to do this. People need to know what happened." Tommy joined them on the porch, sat on the steps at his mother's feet. Even at 19, he still sought her closeness. 10 years of being each other's only family, hard to break. "I want to testify about Katie, too," Tommy said quietly. "About how brave she was, how she never stopped trying to escape." Jake nodded. Katie's body had never been found, despite extensive searches of the wilderness around Hawk's cabin. But her story would be told at the trial. The 17-year-old girl who'd fought to the end, who died trying to bring her family home. "There's something else," Sarah said. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a small wrapped package. "I made this for you." Jake opened the package carefully. Inside was a wood carving, a small eagle, carved from a piece of birch. The detail was extraordinary, every feather perfectly rendered. "When did you learn to carve?" 10 years of captivity," Sarah said with a slight smile. "Hawk brought me tools and wood to keep me busy. Said it was better than having me pace the cabin all day." Jake turned the carving over in his hands. On the bottom, Sarah had carved an inscription. "For Jake, who never stopped looking." "I don't deserve this," Jake said. "You do," Tommy said firmly. "Mom told me the story 100 times, how you recommended the route because someone had lied to you, how you blamed yourself for something that wasn't your fault." "It took me 10 years to figure out the truth." "It took you 10 years to find evidence," Sarah corrected. "But you never stopped believing something was wrong. Detective Jensen told me you called her department every few months for years, asking if there were any new leads." Jake had forgotten about those calls. Drunk calls, mostly, late at night when the guilt was eating him alive. Jensen had always been patient, professional, promising to contact him if anything new developed. "She also told me about the searches you organized," Sarah continued. "How you used your own money to hire private investigators, how you spent vacations walking creek beds and ravines, looking for any sign of our car. I was looking in the wrong places." "You were looking. That's what mattered." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the afternoon light move across the valley. Jake had offered to let Sarah and Tommy stay in the cabin permanently, but Sarah was determined to build their own life. She'd found a job at a plant nursery in town, was saving money for a small house with a big garden. Tommy was starting community college in the fall, planning to study environmental science. He wanted to work on cleaning up sites like Copperhead Lake, turning corporate crime scenes back into wilderness. "Uncle Jake," Tommy said eventually, "can I ask you something?" "Anything? Do you think Dad would be proud of us, of how we survived?" Jake looked at his nephew, David's son, grown up strong and decent despite everything he'd endured, at Sarah, who'd kept Tommy alive and hopeful through 10 years of captivity, at the small garden behind the house, proof that life could grow even in the darkest soil. "Tommy, your father was proud of you before you were even born. He used to talk about the man you'd become, the things you'd accomplish. And Sarah." Jake turned to his sister-in-law. "David loved you for your strength. He'd be amazed at how you kept your family together." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I miss him every day." "So do I, but he's not really gone. I see him in Tommy's determination, in your refusal to give up, in the way you both take care of each other." Jake's phone buzzed. Text message from Detective Jensen. "Torres just accepted a plea deal. Life without parole. It's over." Jake showed them the message. Sarah read it, then closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "It's really over," she said. "The legal part is," Jake said. "But the rest, the healing, the moving forward, that's just beginning." As the sun set behind the mountains, Jake thought about the phone call that had started everything. David asking for advice about a route to Anchorage. Simple brothers' conversation that had led to a decade of tragedy. But maybe, Jake thought, it had led to something else too, to the discovery that some bonds can't be broken, even by 10 years of separation, to the knowledge that love is stronger than fear, that hope can survive anything, that families can be rebuilt even after they're shattered. Tommy stood up, stretched, looked out at the woods where he'd learned to split firewood and track deer and live free. "I think I'll go for a walk before dinner," he said. "Don't go too far," Sarah said automatically, then caught herself. "Sorry, old habit." Tommy smiled. "It's okay, Mom. I'll stay close." But as he walked toward the tree line, Jake could see the difference in his stride. No longer the careful, fearful steps of a prisoner. Now he walked like a young man who owned the world, who could go anywhere and do anything. Sarah watched her son disappear into the woods, her face showing the eternal tension of motherhood, pride and terror, love and worry, hope and fear, all mixed together. "He's going to be okay," Jake said. "I know, we all are." Jake looked at the eagle carving in his hands, at the inscription Sarah had carved. For Jake, who never stopped looking. He hadn't stopped looking. Even when he'd been looking in the wrong places, even when he'd been blaming himself for sins that weren't his, even when everyone else had given up hope. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. In the distance, Tommy's voice drifted back through the trees, not calling for help, not in fear, but in simple joy at being alive and free and young in a world full of possibilities. The sound of a nephew Jake had thought was dead, a family he'd thought was lost, a future he'd never dared to imagine. The sound of coming home.